Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Lucy and in today's video we're talking about my favourite fantasy books. So I have made a few videos about my favourite fantasy books on my channel. One of them I actually put out last year. However, my opinions have definitely changed and my list has been updated. So I really wanted to put this video out and give you guys an updated sense of what my favourite all-time fantasy books are. I've managed to limit this video down to only 6 books that are my all-time favourites at the minute. So there are some new entries and I am honestly shocked by the amount of incredible fantasy out there right now, and I still have loads of fantasy books on my TBR that I do really want to get to at some point. So if you're kind of like, oh, you know, why isn't this book in here, why isn't this book in here, likelihood is I haven't read that book yet. Do leave your fantasy recommendations down in the comments though, and I'll be sure to check them out and hopefully read them very, very soon. So let's start because I have some exciting ones to share with you. The first one is an old favourite that honestly I feel like is due a reread very, very soon. It is The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. This is book 1 in the Mistborn series. This is adult epic fantasy, and honestly, Brandon Sanderson is one of the biggest names in the fantasy genre, especially the adult fantasy genre. And I read this series for the first time a good few years ago, maybe 6 years ago or something. So as I say, it's due for a reread. So this book is about a world that is basically being ruled under this Lord Ruler who runs a very corrupt society, and the people are basically treated as slaves. So in this world, ash falls from the sky because the world is so corrupt and so kind of polluted by this Lord Ruler that it's just a really awful place to live. It follows a street urchin called Vin, who is our main character in the series. She kind of teams up with this criminal mastermind called Kelsia, who is one of my favourite characters ever. I love Kelsia so much, and his exploits in this book are just absolutely amazing and genius. So Vin gets caught up in this kind of group, and Vin also has this magical ability called allomancy, where she can control metals, and Kelsia and the gang kind of help her to control this power. But ultimately, it is a story of rebellion, of revolt. It's got an incredibly complex magic system, which is very, very unique as well. I love the kind of idea of controlling metals. It's such a unique concept. Also, the world building is absolutely incredible. The characters are absolutely lovable and there is plot twist galore. Also, the ending is just one of the most craziest, heartbreaking endings ever. And honestly, this book is just full of surprises, full of ups and downs, and I just adored it. I do think I need to reread because this honestly is one of the best fantasy books I've ever read, and definitely cements Brandon Sanderson as kind of a big name in the genre. So I would really recommend, if you've not read The Final Empire yet, please do read it. You will love it, I guarantee. Okay, we have our first new entry in my favourite fantasy books. It is The Poppy War. If you've been watching my recent videos, you will not be surprised that this book makes an entrance. I did want to include the second book, The Dragon Republic, in this video as well, but I thought that might be a bit too kind of I don't know, take up valuable space. But just know that the first and second book in this series are equally incredible. And I've just finished the second book, The Dragon Republic, and my mind is blown. My mind is blown. So The Poppy War is basically a grimdark fantasy novel all about a country called Nikan, which has basically been ripped apart by wars over the past few decades, and they are just on the cusp of the third Poppy War, which is against Nikan and the Federation, which is another country, and basically they're kind of sworn enemies. So Rin, our main character, finds herself being accepted into Signgard, which is a military school, and it's one of the most elite military schools in the country. She basically gets trained up in the art of war, trained to be a soldier, but at the same time she realizes she has these kind of abilities where she is essentially a shaman and she can commune with the gods in order to have this immense power. So this is a book kind of steeped in inspiration from Chinese military history. So the Opium Wars is a big inspiration for this book. As it's grimdark fantasy, the characters do things that are very morally grey. They do some things that you as the reader may not agree with at all. And there are some pretty shocking and abhorrent scenes in this book, but it really does not shy away from the realities of war. So that's why I really love this series, because not only is it just really well written, the kind of like realities of war are just present on the page. And in terms of the fantasy elements, like the magic system is amazing. The kind of communing with the gods, and especially the god that Rin finds herself communing with, is really fascinating. And honestly, this book has everything. This book is just incredible, and I urge you all to read it. Please read it if you've not read it yet. It's one of my favorite books of all time now, and I have no regrets. I have not yet read the third book in the series, so I haven't completed the series yet, but I kind of already know that that book is going to be amazing. It's called The Burning God, and it was only published recently, so I do need to get my hands on a copy, and I just can't wait. I am buzzing about that book. Okay, we have our second new entry into the favourite fantasy list. It is A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J Maas. You might know if you've been watching my channel for, I don't know, pretty recently, to be honest. I do not hide the fact that I'm a massive Sarah J Maas fan, but I have loved her books ever since Throne of Glass came out many years ago. And A Court of Silver Flames is the recent installment in the Court of Thorns and Roses series, which has kind of had a transformation over the past few years since the first book came out. So I actually put the first book, Court of Thorns and Roses, on my previous favourite fantasy book videos, and honestly, I'm sat here with A Court of Silver Flames next to me, so you will have seen how that progression has been. This series has basically progressed from YA fantasy to adult fantasy. This book is firmly in the kind of adult fantasy genre. It is essentially fantasy romance. The romance is at the heart of this book, but so are other kind of really interesting fantasy kind of tropes and ideals. So this book essentially is about a world of the Fae, so fairies, and it is a continuation from the first 3 books in the series, which are focused on the main character Feyre's kind of journey. This is based around Feyre's sister called Nesta, and she's had quite a painful journey, let's say that, to getting to this book. She basically was transformed from human to Fey and had to deal with a lot of pain and suffering along the way. This book basically really is about her pain. This is about her getting over a lot of the trauma that she's experienced and basically learning to love herself and love those around her again, I guess. So this book is a chunky one, but when I say that I loved every single page of this 700-800 fantasy book, I just honestly can't convey how well written Nesta's story is, how incredible the world is. Just when you think the world can't get more detailed, like after the first 3 books in a series, it just manages to expand the world and the kind of world building, the lore, everything around this fairy world is incredible. And Nesta herself is one of those characters that you can't help but root for. She is so troubled but so feisty, and honestly, she is just so precious, and this book was everything that I hoped it would be. I was a bit nervous about this coming out because I had such high expectations, but this is firmly one of my favourite Sarah J Maas books ever, and one of my favourite fantasy books ever, to be perfectly honest. I do think I need to reread this very soon, just because the first time, I don't know if I took everything in properly, just because I was so kind of desperate to read it, you know? So I love this book very much, and I think you should all read the series if you haven't yet. The first book is A Court of Thorns and Roses, and it's incredible. Okay, so the rest of the books are YA fantasy, and the next book on my list is The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. So I came very late to the game with this one. When I say that this was so hyped on booktube for many years, I mean it. It was so hyped, and I think that slightly put me off. I just didn't really know what the hype was about, and then last year at the start of lockdown I read this whole series and absolutely fell in love with everything. Like, it really does deserve the hype, and I think very, very few books I can say are like that, where the hype is just so massive, but this deserves every single bit of praise about it. So The Cruel Prince follows a girl called Jude, and she is a human who is basically brought up in fairy. Because she's been brought up in fairy and basically is living amongst the fae, she kind of yearns to be a fae herself and really just wants to be part of their world. She teaches herself to fight, she tries to, you know, basically be a part of their society. She has huge clashes with Cardan, who is a prince of fairy, and he basically is really cruel to her, hence the Cruel Prince. But they are basically thrown together. There are twists and turns galore in this book, but essentially it is about Jude's kind of rise to power and her kind of like discovery of herself and discovery of her own strength in this world that's basically out to get her. So it is full of court intrigue, it's full of betrayal, and honestly, it's just one of my favorite fantasy books ever. I just want to reread this again. I'm saying this about all of the books I mention, but that's kind of because, you know, it's reminding me how much I love these books. And this series in particular is just one of the most magical, romantic, kind of dark series I've read in a very long time. And if you're into fantasy romance, and if you're into like fairy fantasy, high fantasy, this will be very, very up your street. So the next book on my favorite fantasy list is one that is particularly relevant at the moment because the Netflix adaptation is coming very, very soon. It is, of course, Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. This is the first book in the Six of Crows duology. So it's Six of Crows and then Crooked Kingdom. These books, guys, these are part of the Grishaverse, which is basically Leigh Bardugo's kind of world, I guess. But Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom are definitely my favorite books in that world. And Six of Crows especially just was such a breath of fresh air. This is essentially a heist novel where this kind of group of ragtag criminals and outcasts basically have to do this like impossible mission that requires them using all of their very unique skills. This is told from 6 points of view, hence Six of Crows. Each of the crows get their own point of view. Each of them are so different and so unique. They each have their own kind of like set of skills, as I said, but they're all led by Kaz, who is the kind of criminal mastermind behind the Six of Crows. He is honestly one of the most fascinating characters I've read about. Like, he is kind of like so broken and just like damaged that he is just fascinating to read about. Like, he does not give a crap. Like, he is so cutthroat, it will just surprise you. So I think reading such a character like that is just really exciting, and honestly, you end up falling in love with every single one of these characters. There are super high stakes, there are some super fun, like very, very clever like plot devices and mysteries, and honestly all these characters will surprise you and just shock you at every turn. So I am buzzing about the Grisha series coming onto Netflix. I think it's at the end of April, and I think this video will be out by then, and I'm just so looking forward to seeing those two worlds of Six of Crows and the Grisha series like combined. I can't wait for that. Sign me up. So Six of Crows is definitely up there on my best fantasy books ever because this book just blew me out of the water. I'd never read anything from 6 points of view, and also never really read many heist stories, and the world of Ketterdam as well is just fascinating. So I would really recommend Six of Crows if you've not yet read this book. It will blow you away. And finally, this may be a surprise because I think this is a YA series that honestly does not get enough hype or like talk as it should do. It is The Winner's Curse by Marie Rutkowski. This is the first book in the Winners series, and this is essentially a kind of like a Roman inspired world, and it is a world built on slavery essentially. It follows our main character Kestrel, who is a general's daughter, so she is very kind of high up in society. Essentially, she buys a slave after seeing him in the market one day, and she basically tries to save his life by buying him. Kestrel and Aaron essentially form this relationship, and she falls for him, and that basically starts off a series that is mind-blowing, detailed, just excellently plotted. And I think from the cover, you don't get how epic and well written this book is. Even though these books are marketed as YA, I would say that there are kind of themes in there that are perhaps more in the adult spectrum. Like, they are less about kind of self-discovery and first love, which are a lot of themes used in YA fantasy. There is more kind of themes around warcraft and political intrigue, and these are just, you know, I think these kind of are in the same vein as some of the more kind of war-driven fantasy books like the Poppy War. Honestly, I think if you've been sleeping on this book, you need to read it. The Winner's Curse is honestly incredible, and I can't believe it did take me so long to read. I read this for the first time only a few years ago, but people had already been telling me to read it before then, so I'm very, very glad that I listened eventually. I must say the second book was not my favorite. The third book definitely was up there, but I think The Winner's Curse was just incredible and my favorite book in the series by far. There is a plot twist in this which like baffled me and blew my mind. So you have been warned that this book does not, you know, hold any punches. It is dark, but it is full of kind of politics and, you know, court dramas and, you know, class dramas as well. And obviously it touches on slavery and it handles that very, very well. So I really would recommend The Winner's Curse and the Winner's series in general. So guys, that is it for my favorite fantasy books at the minute. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, why not drop me a comment below telling me your favorite fantasy books of all time. And of course, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you did enjoy this video. And you can also hit that notification bell where you'll be notified whenever I upload, so that way you'll never miss a video from me. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you very soon in my next video. Bye.